Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching or listening to this, and welcome to another episode of the Non-Identity podcast. Now, today we are joined by someone who has kicked addiction, survived prison, and is back in the world of business. He's also a fellow podcast host, hosting Let's Get Real with Joseph Kajy. It's the founder and CEO of Top Fence. It's Joseph Kajy. Hello and welcome to the show.
Hey, Lee, I'm so glad to have me, man. Thanks for having me, brother.
And as people can tell by the accent, you're not over here in England with us. Where are you at the moment?
So I am in Jacksonville, Florida, in the United States.
Brilliant. And is that where you grew up, or did you grow up in a different area of the States?
No, yeah, I actually grew up in Detroit, Michigan, Motor City capital. I'm 31 years old. I moved here to Jacksonville when I was 14.
How was life at childhood in Jacksonville?
Man, so that's where the journey of addiction unfortunately started for me. Today, Jacksonville's got a great place in my heart, but it was a time when I came at a young age, and I was actually looking for my identity when I came here, and just trying to figure out who I was. You know, you're at a young age, and young people just want to become who they think they're supposed to become, and you got friends you're comparing yourself to. I was just lost, Lee. I was trying to find out, who am I? Who's Joseph? And I allowed the world to actually tell me who I was. I allowed my friends to tell me who I was. So whatever they did, I succumbed to. And that's where I started my battle with addiction with opiates. And that was a 12-year journey, man.
Wow. And then how bad did it get?
So, man, it got as bad as it could get, I guess you could say. From 14 to I turned 18. I was 18 years old when I first went to prison. I served 2 years in a Florida State prison at 18 years old. And I always tell people, I was just talking to a gentleman who just got out of prison for 7 years. He came home 2 days ago. And I told him what's crazy about it is I never thought that this would take me where it went. I was a kid who just grew up in a good home and thought I was going to, be a business person like my father. But it's all of a sudden one decision that you make turns into 2 bad decisions to 3 bad decisions. And from the age of 14 to 18, I started to make a lot of them. I got to a place where every morning I woke up and the only thing that I thought about was getting high. How do I get the next drug? And honestly, man, the reason why was I was trying to escape myself. I was trying to escape the things that I felt. I used drugs and alcohol because I liked the effects produced by it. I liked how it made me feel. And the truth is, I didn't feel nothing. When I was sad, I got high. When I was angry, I got high. When I was happy, I got high. I used drugs to battle all my emotions. So when I woke up in the morning and I don't have drugs and I'm sick, whoever had money, I just felt like I had to go get it because I had to either steal, I had to take from people to support my habit. And that's how I ended up in prison the first time.
So what was it about yourself you didn't like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't want to, what I always thought was I had to be somebody else to be liked. I was actually looking for outside validation. I wanted people to tell me, at the age of 14, I moved to a different, like Michigan's up north in the United States and Florida's down south. It's a very different culture change. So when I came here, the way I wasn't really accepted right away. Because up north, we just play sports. Here, they hunt, they fish, they go in their trucks. I never fished. I don't know anything about hunting. So it was different. And I didn't like that. I didn't fit in. I didn't like that nobody accepted me. I felt nobody accepted me for who I was. And looking back, Lee, right now, that wasn't the truth. I just didn't learn how to love myself. That's the truth is I was having a problem loving Joseph. And because I didn't love myself, I needed other people to tell me, hey, I love you, or hey, you're good, or hey, we accept you, because I didn't love myself. And that's where I struggled with the identity. And I believe I didn't love myself because I didn't know how. I did have a good upbringing. Again, it's not to blame my circumstances, but the way I felt was nobody showed me how to love myself. How do I, am I good enough? Am I this? My family's from the Middle East. So, men in our culture don't say, I'm proud of you, or well done, son, or good job. And it's not a bad thing. My dad is an amazing father. I wouldn't have asked for a better father. But growing up, I didn't know if I was a good kid. I didn't know if I was accepted. And that's what I was looking for. I was looking for outside validation. So no matter where I found it, and no matter who was around, I took the validation from anybody.
Do you feel them people weren't teaching you how to love yourself, or do you think they were fake friends?
Honestly, man, I don't like to blame other people for why I was where I was at. And I think at the time is they were living the life that they were living, and they were just looking for other people to join them. That was it. And I said, I'll come on board. They weren't out to get me. They weren't bad people. These were just people who were doing drugs themselves. And when Joseph said, hey, come on, I'll get high with you, they were like, come on board. And I don't think any of them were fake. I don't think any of them were trying to do anything bad. I just think they were doing what they were doing. They were young too. And I did the same thing. When I turned 15 and 16, I was getting high, and there was a kid who said, hey, what do you do? I said, I smoke weed. I do opiates. Do you want to come hang out with us? And he said, yes. I was like, cool. Another person to get high with. I wasn't trying to be fake to him, but I was just looking for other people to do what I was doing.
That sort of validation that I'm doing the right thing. So, if you have a group of people, it's like group culture. If you're all doing the same thing, then it must be okay.
That's right. And that's where I learned, and that's one thing I find now, man, is self-love. I talk about so much because I never had it. And nowadays, like, I turn to drugs to make me feel better about myself. But nowadays people are turning to other stuff, whether it's pornography, whether it's buying things, whether it's women or men, or it's drugs and alcohol, because they're trying to figure out how to cope with their problems instead of actually dealing with their problems. And it's because they're having a problem loving themselves. I just turned to drugs and alcohol because I didn't love myself. So I turned to something else because I didn't love myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And what was prison like? Did it scare you? Did you not care? Was it?
No, it was, what's so crazy is when you're so lost, man, I was so lost in the world that I got arrested, and I got arrested on like 4 felonies. It was burglaries. It was robberies. And I'm on the worst floor in the county jail of Jacksonville, where murderers are at, and people are doing life sentence. I remember my second day in jail, the guy came back and he went to trial and he got a life sentence. And it was like, what's going on here? I was so oblivious. I remember telling the guy that was sleeping in my cell. I said, man, it was November. And it was November 4th that I got arrested. And maybe a couple days after, I said, I just hope I'm home for Halloween. And he looked at me. He's like, do you not realize you're about to go to prison? You have 4 felonies on your record. And when he said that, I was like, no. Because, let me tell you one thing. Joseph always thought he was going to get away with it. You couldn't tell me nothing. You couldn't tell me I was going to prison. I didn't believe him. I have 4 felonies that serve up to 15 years on each felony. And in Joseph's mind, I'm going home. The first time reality hit for me was the first time I went to court, and my parents hired a lawyer. He said, listen, you're going to go to prison. The question is how long? Yeah. And that's when it hit me. And I was 18 years old, so I was at a young age. And a lot of times when we're in our circumstance, we don't realize what's going on, and we're just trying to get through it. And that's what I did at the age of 18. I wasn't allowing my circumstance to make me. I was just in the circumstance, and it's like in prison, they say, don't do your time. Don't allow your time to do you. Because if you allow your time to do you, you'll do what I did when I went to prison. They gave me a 2-year sentence. They first shipped me off to prison. I was scared because I had no idea what to expect. You watch movies and you see things that are going on in these prisons of people stabbing each other in gangs. And, I thought that's what was going to happen. What actually happened when I first went to prison was I went to a minimum security prison. So everybody's going home. And the reality is people are trying to do their time. But what they're also trying to do is they're trying to take advantage of people. There is people in there who will say, hey, you need to fight. If you're not going to give me some food or give me your stuff, fight me for it. What I learned was the culture was very different in there. And I didn't know. All I did was exactly what I did when I was 14. I adapted to the culture. I became what they were doing. Nothing changed for Joseph. He just didn't have any drugs in his system. So when Joseph hung out with the people who were ghetto and act hood and liked rap music, I liked rap music too. And that's what I see now is a lot of people are just trying to be other people. And that's what I was doing. So even in prison, I would play volleyball with the guys and then I'd go back on the basketball court. I still didn't know who I was. I still was fitting into these other groups. So I made it through, I got through it. Nothing crazy happened in there. It was me just being incarcerated, which being incarcerated is just, it's like living in the streets, but in a confined space.
Yeah.
So I learned how to try to adapt to the culture there. But before you knew it, the time was over. I felt like that time went by a lot faster. I went to prison the second time when I was 22. It was 3 years. That time seemed like it was double the amount of time there because, again, I was just succumbing to what everybody else was doing in prison.
So when was the eureka moment and you felt like, right, I need to change my life now. I'm heading down a horrible route here. I need to do something. When was that moment?
Yeah. So that moment probably happened to me 35 times before I actually did it. You know, I've told myself, and this is what we do, right? We tell ourselves we're going to change. We tell ourselves I'm going to do something different, but there's no action behind it. We don't do anything different. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. So for so many times, I told myself when I got out of prison, it's going to be different this time. Even when I was getting high, I would try to get sober for like a day and I say, it's going to be different this time, but I didn't change nothing. The moment that I actually, back to your question, the moment that I said, okay, Joseph, you have to make a change. When I went to prison again, I got out of prison that first time. I got back to getting high again. Same old story, stealing, robbing, get arrested again. This time they give me 3 years with 2 years probation. And like I told you before, prison is the streets confined in in closed walls. So there's a lot of drugs in prison. And I won't say it, but I didn't stay sober in prison. And they sent me to this work release program where they let you out about a year before you come home. They allow you to get a job. You wear an ankle monitor, so they monitor you everywhere you go. And I was still using drugs. I was still the same old Joseph that got into prison, and nothing changed about me. But the moment that changed was if you're not obeying the rules at this halfway house, pretty much, they send you back to prison to complete your sentence. So I had 4 months left. So they end up sending me back because I wasn't obeying the rules. And I sat in a 10 by 10 cell waiting for them to ship me back to some other prison for the next 4 months. Now I was sitting there and I remember there was an individual. Now in Florida, they put a letter next to your inmate number. They call it an inmate number. So the first time you go to prison, you'll have a 0 letter, a 0 number. And then the second time is an A, the B is a 3, so on and so forth. This guy had a K letter. So this is an older man who's in the cell. As soon as I get in there, I look at his inmate. He's got a K. And he sees me and I have an A. This is my second time. And I'm 23 at this time. And I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, you're going to be just like me, man. You're on your way. And I don't know why that my spirit changed in that moment. But I remember just looking at him thinking, I don't want this to be me. This is the first time I think genuinely in my core, in my heart, I said, I don't want to do this anymore. But what I was scared of was what was going on in my mind. What was going on in my mind is you don't know how to stay sober. You don't know how to live life without chasing drugs. That's all you've ever done. You're good for nothing. You're a thief. You're a drug addict. That's all you'll ever be, because that's what my mind told me. And I was struggling with that because I didn't know how to get that away. Now I'm a believer of God. I have a higher power that I call God. And the first time in my life, I got on my knees and I cried out like I was speaking to somebody who was there. And I remember I wrote it all down in about 12 pages, front to back. I still have those pages today. And it was me just pouring out my heart. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. I know I'm not a bad person. I know there's good in me. And I was actually afraid to get out of that cell, Lee, to get back into prison because the same things were there. And I have never been able to live life without saying no to drugs. And I didn't understand it. It was so, my mom, she's not a drug addict. And she'd come to me, she didn't understand it. She's like, Joseph, if you know it's bad for you, why do you keep going? And I said, Mom, I think it's the only way I know how. I don't know why. And that's the truth. I didn't know why. I wanted to figure that out though. And then I realized, and when I got out of that cell, I didn't get high there. So I just started reading some books. I started reading my Bible. That's what I read for my higher power. And what I found was there's a lot of things in your mind you could change. Positive thinking. It was almost like I never knew this world existed. And then when I came home, I knew the only thing I had to do was stay sober. And that's when I put myself in the program of recovery. So back to, it's kind of a long answer for you, but for when the moment changed was sitting in that cell, realizing that if I don't make a change right now, that my life is going to be like this. And change is hard. It wasn't easy. It's uncomfortable. You don't know. I mean, I had to deal with my past. I had to deal with people that I stole from. I had to deal with that stuff. But a lot of times it's in the change that you find your true self. It's dealing with your past. It's dealing with your struggles. It's dealing with your shortcomings that you actually become the most authentic version of yourself. And that's what I found when I started on that journey, when I got out of prison. Yeah. And we all have a story. You know, everybody, like somebody listen to this, they have something they struggle with in their past. You know, look, I was molested as a child when I was 5 years old till the age of 8. And I'm not saying yours may be to, yeah, I'm not saying like dealing with that. I never dealt with it. I just ignored it. And I think a lot of times people don't want to deal with their past because they think it's like opening a door that you closed. You know, I closed that door and I don't want to do it. Well, that door is starting to light up on fire and it's affecting you in way of life.
Yeah.
How about we open the door and get the flame out? And how about you realize like, hey, because of these things happen to you, or because you messed up in high school, and it could be small, like I didn't make the basketball team, so I think I'm not good enough. There's little things that happened in our past we don't want to face because we just threw them away. And I believe we need to deal with those stuff. Let's bring those stuff out and understand, why did you feel that way when you failed? Well, I felt that way because I felt like I wasn't good enough. And now you know how to use failure. Now you know what tools you can do to actually treat failure. It's by opening up your past.
And what do you do now? Like, because obviously we still have good and bad days. If something bad happens, how do you stay away from drugs and alcohol? What do you do instead?
Yeah. So my program of recovery has been a huge asset to me. They've given me so many tools to help. The reality of addiction is the disease centers in your mind. So if I know it's not, my body's not going to tell me you want drugs. You know, I'm sober today. My body's not going to crave it, but my mind is going to play games. And the reality is I was telling somebody the other day, it's when I was on drugs, I was on a roof, right? I'm standing, imagine like a image of somebody standing on a roof, leaning over, about to fall off the roof and die. Now that's at your worst point. You're at a 16-story building about to fall down and die.
Yeah.
And then somebody tossed a ladder and you just threw the ladder down because you didn't want it. Well, now that you're sober, you're on the ground. You're sober. You're not on drugs. You got off the roof. Well, that ladder's still there. And every bad decision you make and every bad person that's in your life or negative person that's going to take you back to that roof is just a step. You're not going to flow up to the roof, but it's one decision that you make and certain little things that happen. Today, I realized that if every day I get on my knees, I pray, I ask God to help me to stay sober today.
Yeah.
I ask God to put people in my life to stay sober, but the tools that help me to stay sober today. Now I think the only way to do it is to deal with the past first. But after I dealt with that, it's an everyday thing. I don't wake up thinking about drugs and alcohol, but I know I can become selfish and start thinking about myself. And that will lead to me doing things for me. And that'll lead to depression, which will lead to drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
So I do daily inventories every night. I think about, is there anything I could have done differently today? Is there anybody I hurt that I need to fix those things?
Wow.
You know, I'm constantly just trying to become a better version of myself every day because I know if and it's also being in a state of gratitude. You know, when I'm in a state of gratitude, there's nothing you could tell me. There's no complaining I'm doing. It's my fullest place of life when I'm in that state of gratitude. And one of the biggest things I would add to that, and this is what I say, like it's a tough question to answer because I don't think there's one thing that I do.
Yeah.
You know, I have a higher power, so I stay close to him. I have people in my program or just people that I could, if I'm having I still have bad days. Now, when I have bad days, I don't say I want to go use, but I have bad days and I feel bad about myself or I'm struggling with something. I always I need to get it out. That's the biggest thing I think is people don't get it out. They don't share with somebody else something that they're struggling with. And then all of a sudden that self-hatred starts piling up because you didn't share the things with someone else. And someone else says, hey, I know how you feel. Or, hey, man, this is how I can help you. You know, so there's a lot of little things that I do every day. But I know for a fact that my higher power, I wouldn't be here today without him. And I know a lot of people struggle with that in addiction. They struggle with the higher power thing because, and I don't know how somebody stays sober without a higher power. I know I can only speak for myself, I guess, but without a higher power, knowing that there's somebody out there who's in control of my life and he's orchestrating things for me to go. It's like being in a rowboat with God. I'm going to row and I'm going to allow God to steer. I never steer and God never rows. You know what I mean?
No, that makes perfect sense. So you took on the world of business and you founded Top Fence. What is Top Fence and why did you decide to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I never even, the entrepreneur realm was something that I never knew I was going to become. what ended up happening was my self-worth started like growing. And as I started working for people, I started realizing like, man, I could do a lot more than this, and being a convicted felon, you're always told that there's a lot of limits on your life.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of people tell me you can't do this and you can't do that. And I remember there was a time when I came home, I said, I'm never going to allow somebody's limits to be put on myself. My probation officer told me, people who come out of prison the second time and they're on probation, 93% of them go back to prison. And when she said that to me, I was like, that's interesting. That means 7% don't. And I'm going to be part of that 7%. So I started gaining this self-confidence that I'm going to just become everything I can be. And I don't want no limits. So working for people gave me limits. I'd work for somebody for 6 months. They'd give you promises and they break those promises. And now I'm upset that they're in control of my life now. And the only reason, it's funny how I got into fence is I had a job just working for a fence guy. I've never done fence work. When I was in active addiction, I was a server, but I worked for this fence company and I worked there for 6 months, and everything I did when I worked there, I was just trying to learn everything. I wanted to know everything about fence because I thought the more I know, the better I'll be, the more money I'll make.
Yeah. But
I found out very shortly with the company that I was working for, that wasn't the case. He didn't care. They didn't care how much I knew. They just said, hey, you're a convicted felon. He actually told me you're lucky you have a job. And when he told me that, I remember saying, I got to go do something different. And a friend of mine called me and said, hey man, can you come put up a fence for me? You do fence? I said, yeah, I can do it. And at the time I never put up a fence by myself. I've always done it with like some help. So this was like a challenge for me, but it was a buddy of mine. I said, hey, I guarantee if I can't figure it out, I'll figure it out and I'll do it for cheaper than anybody. And when I saw how much money I made doing that one fence, I said, there might be something here. What if I could do like this on the side? It really just turned into a side hustle for me. And I started doing it on the weekends. And then when the employer that I was working for found out that I was working on the weekends, we only worked Monday through Friday. So this was my free time I was doing it. He told me if I did it again, I wouldn't have a job. So I quit. And my wife was pregnant. And I remember when I first told her, I said, babe, I'm going to start a fence company. And she's like, what? I said, yeah, I'm just going to start it. I'm quitting my job. And I think all I got to do is find customers. I mean, I did one job and I made what I made in 2 weeks working for that guy. So if I can just find 2 jobs a month, I'll make the same amount of money that I did there. And that's all I did. Honestly, I wasn't thinking it was going to be what it is now. I'll be honest with you. I was just like, it's better than the other job. And throughout the past 4 years, it got to a place where I was like, I started listening to some entrepreneurial podcasts. I started reading some books on self-development and building a business. And I started saying, man, I could try this, I got nothing to lose. And so the journey started. I started putting up fence by myself. I never had a truck. I put up fence out of a Camry. My supplier would like drop the materials off and I would I'd install the fence. And then I got so busy, I ended up hiring people. And now we have a team of 16 people after 4 years. We have 4 crews. I got a salesman and an assistant. And that's what's the amazing thing about entrepreneurship. If you ask me, the most thing I love about entrepreneurship is the opportunity it provides for other people.
Yeah.
I want to make sure they love what they do. They're happy at their job. I get to know them. I get to know them personally and hopefully bring them value too in their life,
Right, is that scary as well that you've got 16 other people's livelihoods in your hands? So if you make that wrong decision, it has a domino effect on your employees as well. Is that a pressure situation?
Yeah, I used to feel really pressured. I still feel responsible for my team. Don't get me wrong. But there was a time when I brought everybody on because what I felt when they came on board, I'll take it back to the first crew that I hired. The guy was working hourly and I was trying to get him to come work for me. And I was telling him about my dream and my vision of what I'm going to do with this company. And I've told this same dream and same vision to 5 other fence guys who install fence. And they never it's like they didn't believe in it. They were like, this sounds good, but I'm not coming on board. And all I remember is I talked to this one guy and I said, hey, look, whoever's going to come, if it's not going to be you, it's going to be somebody. And I'm going to build something great. And whoever's going to come on board, they're going to be the luckiest person ever because I'm going to take care of them. I'm going to make sure they're good. And he came on board. And I remember when I said that, I felt at that moment when he came on board, I said, I'm responsible now. I have to be responsible to make sure I get him enough jobs. And that was a good thing at first for me because it lit a fire under me. Like I knew I could always go put up fence and make money. So I wasn't afraid of that anymore. But now I have somebody else's responsibilities for me, like on my plate. Like I have to, if I'm not selling any fence jobs, this guy's not feeding his family. So it was a good thing in the beginning. And that's what I think catapulted my business was I worked so hard to make sure that I would never run out of a job for this guy. And then it became too much for him. So I hired 2 and then 3 people. And then I started getting anxiety. Like you said, I said, man, if something goes wrong, these people can't feed their families. What that led to was I was trying to make everybody happy. And I created a culture, honestly, of entitlement. So anytime somebody wasn't happy, I created entitlement by making sure they were happy and giving them more money, giving them whatever they wanted. And it did. It created a culture of entitlement. And I recognized that. I actually read a book. I don't know if you know Gary Vaynerchuk,
No.
but his name is Gary V, but he writes a lot of entrepreneurial books. And he actually talked about that was something he struggled with because he loves people and he wants to help people. And then he created a culture. And I learned through his book that you have to set standards. And if people don't meet the standards, it's not on you. When I started going down that path, it definitely released the pressure off of me. We got rid of a lot of people. We pretty much cleaned house and hired new people. And when I hired new people, I set the expectation right off the bat. Like, hey, I'm going to do my part to build this business. And as we grow together, we'll grow this business together. And when the fears come on me, like you asked, like, am I afraid that if I make a mistake that these guys, something's going to happen to them? I'm honestly not today. And the reason why is I'm still making mistakes.
Yeah.
You know, that there's only certain mistakes you can make that's going to demolish your business. And we know not to make those. But I know if something were to happen to Top Fence today, it's my responsibility to do everything I can and do my part. And I leave the rest up to God. You know, I mean, I definitely am responsible for these guys and their families. But if something were to happen, it's not on me. You know, I can help them along the way. I'm doing everything I can to make sure those things don't happen. But if I'm going to focus on the fears and what's going to happen, that's what people do, right? People have a business and they never start a business because they're so scared of what's going to happen if and the what ifs. And I just say, what if not? What if it doesn't happen? And when it happens, at that moment, we'll figure it out. So today I don't have that fear anymore. Because if it were to happen again, I'd figure it out. Maybe I'd find those guys good jobs or whatever the case is, but it's not happening now. So I just don't spend a lot of time focusing on something that hasn't become yet.
What's been the hardest points of running your own business?
Yeah, I'd say for me, it was so new that I'd say the toughest thing was the leadership part, you know, was building a team. You know, I mean, finding customers and selling the fence didn't seem like it was, for me, it wasn't tough. I know how to talk to people, but how do I manage a team now? You know, you got different personalities, you have different people. You know, I started treating one guy good. And I would say that was the toughest part for me was creating that team and making sure that we had the right team, you know, and culture, because that's what I wanted in my business. It wasn't about my business. I'll be honest with you, it was always about what it could do for a lot of people. Like once I knew how to make money, I was like, I can go put up fence. And there was a year and a half of my life that I was making the same amount of money, sometimes less than I was putting up fence. But it was cool to like have people to do life with and help them to work and do that. But once it got larger, it was really tough to find that team, you know, and making sure as I'm leading them that I'm doing the right job. Like I hold more responsibility in leading them than I do making sure they're financially okay. Cause I know they'll be financially okay, but I want to make sure I'm leading them the right way, you know, and I'm setting expectations the right way. And I failed a lot in that as I grew. You know, I would, like I told you before, I created entitlement. You know, people were taking advantage of my niceness because I'm just a nice guy. I don't want to yell at you because you're not showing up. And I'm just like, no big deal. You didn't show up today. Come tomorrow. But then the other guys who are showing up were getting upset. Like, I'm here every day and this guy's still getting work. So that was something that I learned through and I'm still learning for today. And I'll be honest, it's been fun. You know, it has been tough. The unknowns are really tough. They're scary a little bit. But to be honest with you, that's why I'm so grateful for my dark past, because I always go back to what's the worst that's going to happen. I'm not going to be in prison. I can always go get another job. And anytime I have a fear, I'm scared in business or in life, I go back to that. You know, your fears are just, I use an acronym like FEAR, the false evidence appearing real. Most of the time, that fears never really happen. They're just thoughts in our head.
Yeah.
And so fears that happened for me in my business, I was able to throw them aside very quickly. When I was scared I wasn't going to find a crew, or I was scared, when I first started, I wasn't going to get enough work, was, hey, the worst that's going to happen is I can always go get another job. It'll be okay. And maybe this won't happen, but I'm going to die trying. At least I know I gave it my all, So the toughest thing was the team. It's tough with 16 people, especially 15 of them are men. My assistant's the only girl there, so you got guys who are dealing with their family issues and their own personal lives. And sometimes I have to have personal conversations with them. But I have gotten a little bit better at the past. I'd like to say I'm doing a better job. But that's something I'm always trying to improve now as a business owner.
Brilliant. And you've also set up your own podcast. So let's get real with JC for Kajy. What's the idea behind that, and why did you decide to go into the podcast world?
Yeah, man, it's so funny. For 6 months, I told myself I'm going to start a podcast. I'm going to start a podcast. And the reason why was because when I wanted to, when I was sober and getting sober and going through business, I listened to so many podcasts, and that's what helped me. I feel like podcasts became my mentors. I listened to Ed Milet. I listened to Eric Thomas. I listened to all these guys who dealt with life and business, and they became my mentors. And I started to learn a lot in life and in business. And I was like, I can now give this stuff to people. I can show people how I can help them. And truthfully, the podcast I thought was going to come out, I called it Let's Get Real, because I always feel like people struggle with getting real. Yeah. People struggle with like talking about their failures. Today in the world we live in, you see a lot of people, they'll see what's glamored is the guy who makes $1 million a year, drives a Lambo, or the successful business owner. Like when people see me as a business owner, I don't want them just to see that. I want them to hear about the real struggles that we face. Yeah. Because what happens, and that helped me so much, because when I was in my business and I was failing, I was listening to these people who succeeded and they were ahead of me in that world. And they talked about how many times they failed. So now when I failed, I was like, oh, I felt like it was just part of it. Like failure is part of entrepreneurship. This guy making money. He's built a business. He's failed. So it must be part of it. So that was the purpose of it. And you and I were talking my first podcast. It's my story. I'm on my AirPods driving in my truck, and it's just me sharing my story. I was like, I don't know who's going to hear it. And the only reason I started was because I was sick of telling myself I'm going to start a podcast. And I was always telling people, stop telling yourself you're going to do something and you don't do it. That's how you lose self-confidence. But that was the one thing that I used excuses, right? I said, I don't have a microphone and I don't know this. So then I just said, throw your AirPods on and record something. And I recorded my story. And the first like 3-4 episodes are things that I learned, was how to deal with failures, how to become what real success looks like. I believe real success is not about how much money you have. It's about how happy you are. Success to me is not money. It's not about how much money I have. It's about how well my marriage is, how good of a father I'm becoming, my relationship with the people in my life. Am I living out the fullest me? Am I being authentic to myself? Am I living the dream that I said I was going to live? Not about money. Money is just, so I made a podcast about that. And then I was on somebody's podcast who interviewed me, and I said, this is really cool. You're sharing people's stories. And I'm wearing a shirt right now. Actually, it says, if you hide your story, you hide God's glory. Yeah. And it's been something that I talk about a lot. It's in what I wanted to share my story. Why I wanted to do it was because I believe that in my story is you're talking about a guy 14 to 26 who can't live life, drug addict, no good. No one person said I was good, to transforming his life today. But it's not because of me. It's because of God and the things that God put in my life today. So that's why I wanted to share my story. And then somebody said, hey, I'll hop on yours. And I was like, cool, I'll interview you. And I fell in love with that. I fell in love with sharing people's stories. Yes, my story is great. It's got some inspiration, but I can only reach a certain amount of people. There's like, I just had a buddy of mine who was in sales. He wasn't a drug addict, but he dealt with growing up without a father. Well, he can speak to people. And I realized, like, if I have people sharing their stories, but the real thing I want them to share is not just a success. If you listen to the interviews we don't talk a lot about where they're at today and the success. We talk about the things they overcame. So that's why I started Let's Get Real. It's to inspire people. I wanted to give people hope, because that's what it did for me. Podcast did that for me. So now I just want to give that back to other people.
I think one thing I find as well, what I'm really enjoying about this is meeting people and actually having the time to
Yeah.
sit down, because I think the world is so busy now, and like social media's um, sort of jammed down our throats. And they say now the average person's attention span on social media is 7 seconds. But I think just taking this time out now to actually listen to someone, as you said, hear their struggles, because on social media, as you said, everyone puts up the fakeness. Look at me in my Lambo, look at me on a jet, look at me at this cool party. But you're not putting up, or you're not talking to people. Well, I woke up this morning and I'm having trouble with my marriage, or I'm facing addiction.
Yeah.
We portray a life that, and it's just nice to actually sit down and, as you said, hear people's struggles and hear the rebuild.
I love that you said that, because I think that's the biggest thing too, is like, is you get to meet people.
Yeah.
You get to have conversations you would never have. Every single person I've ever interviewed on my podcast brought me some value. Like even today, you interviewing me, you just brought me some value by saying some stuff you just said, and we get to slow down and have conversations. And one person, and I'll end with this, I know you have some questions, but I had a mentor of mine who used to post stuff all the time. And I was like, I was curious why you do that. And he said, one day I'm not going to be here and my kids are only going to be able to see highlights, right? But I want to share with them. And I'm almost, every time I take a video, I'm imagining my kids are going to watch this when I'm gone. And maybe my grandkids will watch this when I'm gone. And it's going to be something that I have. And then that takes the pressure off of how many people are going to watch it. Or is there how many views? We get caught up in the how many downloads did my podcast get? I do the same thing because I want it to reach so many people. But then I remember, hey, if it's just, I said this the other day to somebody, sometimes you look at a video and it got 100 views and you're like, oh man, that video, nobody watched it. But if I ask you to go share that same message to 100 people, like stand in a room and talk to 100 people, those people will be frightened. Yeah. 100 people is a lot of people. And we've got so caught up in, it's got to be 1,000, it's got to be 1,000,000. I just want to help one. I always say that, just one more. If I can help one person every day, one person, then that person will go help somebody else. And it's a trickle effect. So no matter how many people are listening, if just one, if it was just me today that got it, I'm going to be able to share what you share with me. So I love that you said that, man. That was great.
Yeah, no, totally. If people want to listen to the podcast or find you on social media, how do they do that?
Yeah, so it's Joseph Kajy, which is last name's Kajy. Everything on my Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. My podcast is, of course, Let's Get Real with Joseph Kajy. It's on Apple and Spotify. You can also go to the YouTube channel, Let's Get Real with Joseph Kajy, where I upload the videos. I also, post some videos of conversations that I've had with people, and then some little stuff that I have on there also. So everything is really, if you just type, even if you type in my name in the podcast, this will come up.
Right, and we'll put all the links in the description below. And one last question. This is a question I ask everyone. Your answer will not change your life journey so far, but if you had 30 seconds with your 13-year-old self, what would you say?
I would tell him, Joseph, it's okay to be you. You don't need to be anybody else. God created you specifically. It's okay to not be like everybody else. You have gifts inside of you. You have things that I've put inside of you specifically. Not everybody's going to like you. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about being judged by people. I created you for a specific purpose, and just accept that purpose. It's not everybody else's purpose. Stop comparing yourself to other people because you're not them. I created you to be who you are supposed to be. You have gifts that other people don't have. So lean into that stuff and stop worrying about being other people. Just be yourself, and that's where you'll find true happiness.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time this evening, and it's been fantastic. So thank you so much.
Absolutely, Lee, man. It was a pleasure talking to you, man. I enjoyed this one. You did a great job, and thank you so much for having me.